it began with a terrifying question. How could a medium bomber built for calm, level runs at medium altitude become one of the most feared low-level strike aircraft of World War II? And why did this transformation come at such horrific cost to those who dared to fly at mast height into sheets of fire? That mystery pulls us from the dramatic launch off an American carrier in April of 1942 to the blinding muzzle flashes of a 75mm cannon and the roar of forward-firing heavy guns that turned the North American B-25 Mitchell into a lethal commerce destroyer across the Southwest Pacific. A story of risk, improvisation, and relentless innovation that reshaped aerial warfare forever. On the morning of April 18, 1942, 16 B-25 B. Mitchells lifted from the flight deck of the carrier Hornet far out in the Pacific. Hours earlier than planned, after a Japanese picket trawler spotted the task force and sent warning radio calls, forcing Lieutenant Colonel James Harold Doolittle to launch at a range of roughly 650 miles, or about 1,046 kilometers from Japan, a do-or-die choice that set the tone for the aircraft's legend and the war's psychological turn. The crews flew on average about 2,250 miles, or roughly 3,620 kilometers, and remained aloft about 13 hours, the longest B-25 mission to that date, while 15 of the 16 aircraft crash-landed or cruise-bailed out on or near China, and one diverted to Vladivostok in the Soviet Far East, a stark measure of the mission's risk and its razor-thin margins. Physical damage in Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Kobe, and Osaka was limited, yet the raid forced Japan to divert aircraft and ships to homeland defense and delivered an incalculable morale shock to a United States still reeling from December of 1941, proving that American bombers could reach the home islands and escape to China, a strategic result far greater than the tonnage of bombs dropped that day. You might ask, why did the B-25 become the platform for that audacious strike, and how did that success unlock its hidden future as a low-level attacker? Built by North American Aviation, the B-25 first flew on August 19, 1940, and the Army Air Corps accepted the first examples in February of 1941. By the end of the war, 9,816 had been produced, with rugged handling and broad service from the United States to Allied air arms, including the British Commonwealth, the Dutch, China, and the Soviet Union, a scale and versatility that made it a natural candidate for every theater's demands. Originally meant for level bombing from medium altitude, the Mitchell proved unusually tough at treetop height, strafing airfields, skip bombing ships and hammering beachheads. Yet that new role demanded more forward firepower than its early configurations could deliver, especially in the Southwest Pacific, under General Douglas MacArthur's air commander, Lieutenant General George C. Kenney. Here is where the secret spark of innovation appears. Kenney's 5th Air Force needed aircraft that could smash shipping and airfields at low altitude, and he turned to a fearless tinkerer, Major Paul Irvin "Pappy" Gunn, a former Navy man and airline master mechanic, who believed that forward-firing guns could break through deck defenses and set up a clean skip bombing run. Gunn began by cramming 4.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns into the noses of Douglas A-20 Havocs, then escalated on the B-25 as Kenney demanded, pull the bombardier and everything else out of the nose and fill it full of .50 caliber guns, with 500 rounds per gun, plus more guns on the sides and even below, for a cone of fire that would rake any vessel from stem to stern. The result was immediate and brutal. As aircraft were modified, crews trained to fly in low, unleash heavy strafing fire, and skip 500-pound bombs in at mat height, a tactic perfected by Major William Benn and quickly adopted across the force, with medium bombers punching at minimal altitude where accuracy skyrocketed but danger multiplied, each pass a gamble against flak and fighters. By early March of 1943, that new doctrine would be proven in blood at the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, a 3-day clash between land-based Allied air power and a major Japanese convoy bound for Leh in New Guinea, a test of whether modified B-25s and their partners could choke off enemy reinforcement across roughly 500 air miles, or about 800 kilometers of contested seas. On March 2nd, 29 B-17 Flying Fortresses struck first at altitude, sinking and damaging large transports. But the decisive blow came the next day, when 18 heavy bombers and 20 medium bombers drew fire from about 7,000 feet, or roughly 2,100 meters. Then 13 Australian Bullfighters slashed in at deck height, and a dozen B-25 strafers under Major Ed Larner executed skip bombing runs, while a dozen A-20 attack bombers followed. Within about 20 minutes, all merchantmen were sunk, sinking, or fatally damaged, and one destroyer was lost with 3 more crippled. A stunning demonstration of low-level assault tactics in coordinated waves, covered by 16 P-38 Lightnings. That afternoon, 10 more B-25s under Larner and Major John "Jock" Hennebrey struck the remnants, sending more ships under and leaving little but burning hulks. By the count of Allied summaries, roughly 13 to 14 merchant vessels and 7 destroyers were sunk, with American losses of 4 aircraft and minimal crews. Proof that strafing, rockets, and skip bombing from medium and light bombers could annihilate a convoy without surface ships present. A first in the history of such a large naval force destroyed by land-based air power alone. Why did this work? And what made the B-25 the deadliest commerce destroyer of the war, in Kenny's words? The secret was weight of fire, speed at low altitude, and the ability to deliver bombs and guns on the same attack run. As many as 14 forward-firing .50 caliber guns were added to later models, along with 8 5-inch rockets, a 75mm cannon, and a bomb load of about 3,000 pounds, or approximately 1,360 kilograms. A combination that overwhelmed light anti-aircraft crews and tore open ship topsides in seconds. The G model introduced the 75mm gun, initially the M4 cannon, mounted in a shortened solid nose with 2 fixed .50 caliber guns, a bold step that gave pilots the option to fire armor-piercing rounds at barges or coastal targets. The H model refined the concept with a lighter T-13, E-175mm gun on most aircraft, additional forward guns and cheek blisters, and provisions for racks of 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets to supplement strafing and bombs, while retaining the ability to carry a heavy internal load for low-level strikes. In practice, the cannon's slow rate of fire, heavy recoil, and limited ammunition, usually around 20 to 21 rounds on the B-25G, meant that many units removed the big gun and substituted more .50 caliber guns to maximize sustained forward fire. A tactical choice that underscored the Mitchell's core identity as a high-speed gun platform for ship and airfield suppression. Listen to the numbers for a moment, because they tell a chilling truth about capability and risk. A typical B-25H crew numbered about 5, with an empty weight around 19,480 pounds, or about 8,836 kilograms, and a maximum takeoff weight around 35,000 pounds, or roughly 15,876 kilograms, driven by 2 Wright R2600 twin cyclone radial engines rated at about 1,700 horsepower each, or roughly 1,300 kilowatts, giving maximum speeds around 272 miles per hour, or about 438 kilometers per hour at 13,000 feet, or around 4,000 meters, cruising at about 230 miles per hour, or roughly 370 kilometers per hour, with a range of about 1,350 miles, or roughly 2,170 kilometers, and a service ceiling around 24,200 feet, or roughly 7,400 meters. In its most aggressive strafing configurations, the B-25J, with field modifications, could carry 8 fixed .50 caliber guns in the nose, additional cheek guns, and package guns on the sides, building to about 14 forward-firing heavy machine guns, while still hauling roughly 3,000 pounds, or about 1,360 kilograms of bombs for low-level release, an extraordinary concentration of short-range firepower compared to other medium bombers of the era. To that, add racks for 8 5-inch rockets, and, in some cases, external shackles rated around 2,000 pounds, or roughly 900 kilograms, that could even hold a naval torpedo. Such as the Mark 13, though skip bombing and strafing proved tactically superior in most Southwest Pacific conditions, where weather, range, and escort shaped the mission. Now, how did crews use that force? And what did it feel like to fly a B-25 at mast height? Accounts from 5th Air Force operations describe squadrons training to approach at about 50 feet, or roughly 15 meters above the waves, releasing 5-second delay bombs so they would skip like stones into hulls, while nose and side guns shredded anti-aircraft crews and pilot houses. Major Ed Larner's squadron during the Bismarck Sea Battle dropped 37 500-pound bombs and scored 17 direct hits, a hit rate that would be unthinkable at medium altitude against maneuvering ships, achieved only because strafing suppressed defenses and pilots put bombs on the target within seconds of passing over the bow. In later strikes, such as the November 2nd, 1943 attack on Rabaul, B-25s and A-20s surged through phosphorus smoke at harbor level, strafing and skip bombing among cruisers, destroyers, tankers, and merchantmen. Over about 12 minutes, Allied aircraft destroyed or damaged around 114,000 tons of shipping and burned a large portion of Rabaul's port facilities while fighting as many as 125 to 150 interceptors, with American and Australian losses including multiple B-25s and P-38s. Proof that the tactic worked, but at a grim price, in aircraft and crews. The pattern repeated up the New Guinea coast and into the Bismarck archipelago as Kenny's forces cut the enemy's lifelines. Lae, Salamaua, Finschhafen, and the island anchorages faced near-daily strikes, with Kenny tallying around 75 Japanese aircraft, lost simply trying to keep Buna's runway open before abandoning the effort as too expensive, a stark testament to the sustained pressure this low-level doctrine applied. Let's turn the mystery tighter. Why a 75mm cannon in the nose, and did it truly change outcomes? The B-25G's adoption of the M475mm cannon provided a tank-like punch for anti-shipping and coastal targets, firing shells at about 2,362 feet per second, or roughly 720 meters per second. Crews could fire perhaps 4 rounds in a single pass, enough to rupture thin-skinned transports or barges. But the slow reload rate and recoil limited its utility against maneuvering warships, which is why many units later removed the cannon in favor of more .50 caliber guns for continuous suppression. Yet the psychological impact of a tank gun in the sky was real and frightening, especially at river mouths, harbors, and barge routes, where a single high-explosive shell could wreck a pier or scatter small craft. In the H model, a lighter T-13E, one gun reduced handling penalties, but crews still favored the storm of heavy machine gun fire as the most reliable way to break through to a precise skip bomb release. The combination, machine guns for suppression, rockets for standoff strikes, bombs for the kill, made the B-25H and late J strafers the most feared low-level attackers in the Southwest Pacific, a category that General Kenny proudly labeled the greatest commerce destroyer of the war, a phrase earned in convoy after convoy, reduced to flaming debris between the coast of New Britain and New Guinea. If the B-25's ascent as a gunship sounds like a straight climb, the reality was rougher and darker. Low-level attacks invited heavy light-caliber fire and exposed crews to every hazard a coastline could throw at them. Masts, terrain, and weather. During the Bismarck Sea battles, a B-17 pressed its bomb run while burning before losing a wing, and over Rabaul, on that November 2nd, 1943 strike, Hennebrey himself ditched after his aircraft was riddled and an engine knocked out, later rescued while the harbor still burned. one of many crews who learned that the tactic's success never guaranteed survival. Even training for short-deck takeoffs had its mortal risks. The Doolittle crews practiced hard at Eglin Field, Florida, and then craned their Mitchells onto Hornet at Alameda, California to sail west. Names and faces behind the myth of 30 seconds over Tokyo, enduring bailouts into the dark over China, where 2 men drowned and another fell to his death after bailing out near a cliff. While 8 were captured, 3 executed, and 1 died in captivity, the human cost stitched into the aircraft's reputation. The B-25's shift to low-level attacks also pulled it away from the safer altitudes its designers had intended. Strengths like strong structure and steady handling helped at treetop height, but weaknesses like limited armor coverage in the nose and vulnerability to concentrated light flak remained, and crews had to accept that every pass was a bet, accuracy and killing power in exchange for exposure at ranges where even rifles could find aluminum and flesh. Technically, the transformation unfolded across successive variants and field kits. The B-25G replaced the glass nose with a stubby armored nose carrying the 75mm gun and 2 fixed .50 caliber guns, with the ammunition arrangements that often included around 20 rounds for the cannon. Cheek blisters and package guns followed as demand for more forward fire grew, together with extra ammunition feeds for sustained strafing runs measured in seconds that felt like hours to the pilot and gunner working the trigger and reload levers. The B-25H pushed further, adding more forward guns, the lighter cannon in most production, and pylons for 8 5-inch high-velocity rockets that could tear into ships, airfields, and revetments from standoff distances of miles or kilometers, extending the danger envelope for defenders while preserving the option to close for skip bombs when weather and opposition allowed. The most numerous J model returned to a transparent nose for level bombing on paper, but reality in the Pacific drove many units to install solid noses with 8 fixed guns and cheek mounts, field-modifying aircraft into dedicated strafers, before North American-built production aircraft with solid noses and factory-installed heavy gun suites, proving how operational demand can pull manufacturing toward the front line's reality, not the other way around. Across performance data, one theme stands out: balance. Maximum speed figures in the high 200s of miles per hour, about 430 to 470 kilometers per hour, depending on altitude and variant, kept the B-25 fast enough to make a low-level dash and escape, while range numbers around 1,300 to 2,400 miles, roughly 2,100 to 3,860 kilometers with auxiliary tanks, gave reach across the New Guinea Solomon's Arc and the Central Pacific's longer legs, though crews often traded fuel for guns and ammunition depending on the mission. With a wingspan around 67 feet 7 inches or about 20.6 meters, a length around 52 feet 11 inches or 16.13 meters, and a service ceiling close to 24,200 feet or about 7,400 meters, the Mitchells sat in that medium bomber sweet spot that could operate from rougher strips closer to the front, an advantage when stringing new bases along the Papuan coast and the Bismarck Archipelago. And with more than 9,816 built by war's end, there were enough airframes to modify, enough squadrons to retrain, and enough spares to keep the commerce destroyers rolling, a logistics reality that matters as much as any technical diagram. Number 3. The story's human core never left the cockpit. Major Ed Larner's precision, Major Jock Hennebrie's leadership, and General Kenny's relentless push to experiment made the 5th Air Force a crucible of innovation, while Major William Benn's fine-tuned skip bombing work turned a hunch into a doctrine. Those names, and the Australian Beaufighter crews who slashed in at low altitude to rake decks, anchor a chain of people who took risks so that others could learn, refine, and survive. Pappy Gunn himself embodied this spirit, a man whose family suffered under occupation in the Philippines while he rebuilt aircraft, invented gun packages on the fly, tested the 75 in combat, and turned the B-25 into a ship-killing machine at the very moment the Allies needed a blunt instrument to crack convoys that would otherwise bring men and supplies to the New Guinea coast. He died in an aircraft accident in the Philippines on October 11, 1957, long after his wartime impact had shifted aerial tactics toward overwhelming forward fire. Together, these aviators turned the Mitchell into the plane. Kenny called the greatest commerce destroyer of the war, a label born not just from tonnage sunk, but from the way skip bombing, strafing, and rocket attacks froze Japan's reinforcement plans and forced them to choose between defending harbors, ships, or skies in waters where Allied land-based air power now ruled. If the B-25's gunship chapters hint at a longer lineage, that intuition is not wrong. The concept of side-firing or heavily armed gun platforms would mature decades later into dedicated gunships, like the Lockheed AC-130, with battery arrays optimized for sustained fire over a target area. While technology and tactics had evolved, the logic that aimed fire from a stable platform could suppress and destroy ground targets with ruthless efficiency reached back to the hard-won lessons of low-level strafers and cannon-armed bombers over the Southwest Pacific's waters and coasts. An evolution of purpose as much as hardware across the generations of air power. The B-25 showed that an aircraft designed to drop bombs from medium altitude could be refashioned into a precision bludgeon at sea level, fast enough to survive, stable enough to hit, and strong enough to carry an arsenal that rivaled patrol boats. An insight later gunships translated into different geometries and roles, but with the same core aim: dominate the battle space with controllable, sustained fire. One last mystery deserves an answer. Was the B-25 truly among the most heavily armed aircraft of the war, and did that matter strategically? When a single medium bomber could bring 14 forward-firing .50 caliber guns to bear, ripple 8 5-inch rockets, and still drop about 3,000 pounds, or roughly 1,360 kilograms of bombs in a single low-altitude pass, it achieved a lethal density of fire unmatched by most contemporaries in the low-level anti-shipping role, especially when part of a wave designed to suppress and kill in a 20-minute window, as at the Bismarck Sea. Strategically, that mattered because it allowed land-based air to enforce an air blockade, a phrase Kenny used deliberately, strangling reinforcement cycles and isolating bases without committing scarce surface fleets. The transformation of the B-25 into a gunship bomber hybrid was not cosmetic. It changed convoy math in New Guinea's waters and helped pave the way for the Allied push along the New Guinea coast and into the Bismarcks and beyond. And because the Mitchell served in every major theater and with multiple Allied nations, its story is not parochial. It is a case study in wartime adaptation that rippled across units, oceans, and years, from the carrier deck in April 1942 to the convoy lanes in March 1943 and the harbor fires in November 1943, a chain that turns a medium bomber into a symbol of resilience and a machine that carried a 75mm M4 or T-13E1 cannon into the sky.